There are three passages that we are going to look at. We probably won't get to all of them. And I added three words for the passages to help us to get context. The first one is diligence. The second one is generosity. And the third is integrity. The first passage says, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard." And you have to back up to verse 1 of chapter 6 to get a better sense as to where that is going. Chapter 6, verse 1. He says, "My son, if you become a surety for a friend," in other words, you're co-signing for a friend, or for someone else, even a stranger, you are snared by the words of your mouth. You're taken by the words of your mouth. I'm glad that that is not part of our curriculum today. I've co-signed for people, family members and non-family members. I've been burnt. But I still feel as though you have to make a judgment call when that's a good decision to make. And for a family member, you certainly want to help them out if they're in dire straits. So I'm not going to touch on that passage because Solomon has given advice to his son. "My son," it begins. The one who became king after him was Rehoboam. And we know that David started out being the king of Judah because the northern tribes were not with him initially. Saul was king of the United Kingdom, but then David managed to win over the northern tribes and became the United Kingdom of Israel. And Solomon inherited that United Kingdom. But Rehoboam went back to what his grandfather originally had, because apparently Solomon had taxed the people extensively. Solomon asked God for wisdom, and God gave him wisdom. But he didn't exactly live according to the principles of wisdom. Again, just quickly, I'm not trying to tar and feather him. He is the wisest man in history, but 700 wives and 300 concubines. I find one wife is enough.
One more today.
How did you roll?
So, and then he started allowing these wives to lure him into their gods and goddesses, and he was charged with an important assignment when he became king. Remember, David looked at the fact that David had united the kingdom and he was all happy about this. And he looked at the tabernacle and he says, "Why am I living in this palace? And the ark of God is in a tent. I'm going to build a temple." And God said, "No, you're not going to. You're a man of war. So your son will be a man of peace, and he will build the temple." So that was Solomon's important charge. His father assembled all of the resources, but Solomon got to supervise the building, the establishment of the temple. And then Solomon got kind of cocky. Said, "Look at what I have, wealth and all this kind of stuff." And people coming to respect him and honor him and give him these generous gifts. And it went to his head. And next thing, he was off doing things that he shouldn't be doing. When Rehoboam became king, the people came to him and said, "Your father has taxed us extensively, so we want some relief." Well, he asked counsel of two groups. The people who advised his father, the elders, and then the younger people who were with him. And one group said, "Yeah, you should give the people some relief." Then he went to the younger group and said, "No, just increase the taxes on the people." And Rehoboam followed the advice, the counsel of his younger peers. And that is why the kingdom was divided. Because what he was doing was not deemed as being right. And the kingdom was never being reunited after that. Solomon gives this counsel to his son, lots of counsel to his son. And even if he realized that some of the things he did were not the best things to do, he's given good counsel to his son. And then the first thing the son does is goes against that wise counsel. And goes with his friends and, increase the taxes on the people. And he lost the northern portion of the kingdom again. You can be wise and you can pass on wisdom, especially wisdom based on your errors that you've made in life. You're telling the younger generation. And it's up to them to decide to seek that counsel. It is always good when people come to you and ask for counsel, especially when they follow the counsel. But sometimes people come to you for counsel like Rehoboam did. because they just want you to agree with them. They really want for you to say, yeah, what you're doing is right. Have you ever been there? You don't need to answer, but there are people who do that. They will seek counsel from different people until they get to hear the advice that they actually want. Which means they really don't want advice. They want co-signing of what they're doing. Anyway, all this wisdom, and some of it is falling on deaf ears, which is a bit sad. Doesn't mean the counsel isn't good. Just that God gave him wisdom because that's what he asked for. And the consequences is that the kingdom never came back together, and sin continued to increase among the people of God at that point in time until they lost the kingdom to the Babylonians. The counsel for today, as I mentioned earlier, is under three headings. The first passage from chapter 6 is, I call it diligence, or my Bible calls it diligence. In fact, this Bible calls it the folly of indolence. Indolence, which is a fancy word for laziness. Okay, I'm going to teacher's prerogative and tell you of a story I heard when I was 11 years old. There was this kid who was lazy, and the teachers decided that he needed to stay after class. We used to have something called detention. So his assignment in detention was to write a 3-page essay, What is Laziness? So we figured, okay, suppose this is page 1, this is page 2, and this is page 3. On the first page he wrote, this is... That was his 3 pages. Which was a good representation of what laziness is. This is laziness. 1 word per page.
And got him a second detention.
It was clever. So the advice or counsel here is against laziness. I'm going to read the session in context, and then we're going to work our way through some of the content there. And if time runs out, we're going to jump to the integrity part, because I think that is of greater importance. At least that's my opinion. So let's read the session in context. I'm apologizing on behalf of the curriculum. There are very few of us in this room who are actively in the workforce. So it's called Wisdom for the Workforce, but you can give wisdom to those who are in the workforce because you've been there, especially based on errors you have made or errors you've seen. Here's what you should not do. So if you have children or grandchildren or friends or others, you can give them counsel, wisdom for the workplace. Reading from the top of the handout. Very likely you've had the chance to see ants' incessant labors during the summer to provide the colony's winter food. The procrastination-prone persons seeking to avoid the low opinions of family and neighbors, Solomon advises them to learn from the ant. The ant has no commander, no overseer or ruler. The fact that ants could function without such leadership is a marvel. In effect, Solomon says, even if you can't see why you should work with human direction, a boss, at least imitate the ant and work diligently anyway. In ancient Israel, agricultural work had a year-round rhythm. Its busiest seasons were plowing and planting grain fields in late fall, then the several harvests, beginning in early spring and continuing with some downtimes into mid-autumn. The ant must gather in summer. Likewise, an Israelite farmer neglecting the grain harvest would have put his family on the path to poverty and possible starvation. So crucial was the grain harvest that normally each community's entire able-bodied population worked to reap, thresh, and store it as quickly as possible. Today's passage, one of the passages, teaches us that trusting in God does not mean that we do not put the work into what we do to support ourselves or the family. It has a negative in it, so it's harder to read. When we work and use what we have in righteous ways, we find that God is faithful, and in Him we have all we need. I did go searching for a song, and it's not a song that we sing. I don't think I've ever sung the song, but the tune is, "O Master, Let Me Walk With Thee," called Meriton. Da, 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 da. The verse 3 of Song 657 says, "In works or office, field or mart, where our appointments, Lord, may be, grant that with mind and hand and heart, we labor as we would for Thee." The entire song is on that theme, but that was the verse that I thought was most applicable. Number 657, verse 3, by Will Brandt. So we're going to start the reading. We're going to read the first passage, which is Proverbs chapter 6 through 11.
Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man.
The last three verses addresses the sluggard. I guess verses 6, 7, and 8 do, but it raises the question in verse 9. How long will you lie there? And when will you get up from your sleep? Sluggard is a hard word because all of us understand that we need to rest at some point in time. And some of us need more rest than others. But somebody might look at you and judge you because you're not working as hard as someone else. You might not need to work as hard as someone else. Some people might just be in a situation where their life circumstances require them to work 12 hours a day. And you might be able to get by with 6 hours a day or 8 hours a day and satisfy your needs. If you have a larger family or a larger group to support, then obviously you have to put in more time. So the idea of a sluggard would be someone who is really just being lazy. The passage basically talks about the ant and how the ant is programmed to work. Regardless of whether the others are working, the ant is programmed to work. So question number 1 says, why does the teacher, in this case Solomon, use the example of the ant to help the sluggard to understand about hard work? Why this example? Why do you think this example
Because the
is?
ant doesn't need supervision. They just do the work anyway.
And they're storing up for the future,
And they never stop.
for winter.
Right.
I enjoyed watching ants. We had lots of ants around the place. Some of them,
Oh, we used to have ant farms.
yeah. You would see them carrying a load that was many times their size. Thinking, how is that even possible? Yes.
The other thing about the ants is you can see what they do.
I like that. Say more.
Well, you can see the ant carrying. You can see them working together to build an ant hill. The only thing you can't see is what they store. You could see what they bring into their ant hill. But it gives a visual. Oh, and they're working together too.
In line. They're in line too. They stay in line.
It's always.
Yeah, like they don't
Yeah.
need supervision.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I used to put obstacles in the way to break the line. And then continue around and go back in line. Like, what?
And army ants will take themselves and build a bridge to go over water too.
Oh, absolutely.
So this visual is very powerful to anyone who is not inclined towards work. I don't want to beat up on younger people right now. But the younger generation has so much at their fingertips that they do not have that desire to consider the ant. They do not have that desire. I think I may have told a story how a year ago I gave an assignment and the student did it in 5 minutes. It was 5 pages long, single space. And I'm thinking, how on earth could you produce a single space 5-page document in 5 minutes? It only took her a few seconds, but 5 minutes after she clicked on the assignment, she submitted this. I'm thinking, I just want your opinion on this video you're watching. She copied the sentences I wrote to help them to think it through, put them in the chat GPT, and she had a beautiful 5-page single-space document with charts and graphs and equations. And I kept thinking, she has learned absolutely nothing because she doesn't even know, she hasn't even read what she submitted. It's too much to read in 5 minutes. But that is again, I'm not beating up on that generation. If you have provided a means for them to do things very quickly, shortcuts, then why not take the shortcut?
But you haven't learned anything by doing that.
So that's where we want to spend a couple of minutes. Shortcuts can help us to be efficient. Is there a benefit you see to not taking the shortcut? Tell a story or two.
Well, you don't learn because you're cutting the corners on everything.
Yeah.
I think that's why us older people, we had to do it manually instead of typing something out on a computer and then printing it and say, here it is. You know what I mean? I did this, or this is, look, just to find out things. You can go to Google, you can go to any of those sources and find out how to fix your lawnmower, how to fix your car and everything. We never had that. It was either trial or error when we were younger.
Or the card catalog in the library.
So after I printed my 15 copies this morning and I realized I wanted to put the titles, I kept thinking, I could go back and retype it and print 15 more copies. They said, I'm going to handwrite those 3 words because it's not going to take me forever. And halfway through I kept thinking, it would be faster just to go back and print it.
I just saw it on TV this morning that AI is generating paintings now. You can tell the person, I want a cat in a field of flowers in a barn, and what style you want. And then they're selling them at, I forget where they're having this show, but now AI is doing the painting. So people are not using skills they may have to actually pick up a brush. And I mean, AI is supposed to make our lives easier, but it's making lies. It's not true.
It's making us lazier.
Yeah.
Well, and in that way, they don't learn patience. They have no patience then. Get it done, gone, and it's gone.
So
It didn't soak in.
So we create a disposable society
Yeah.
where nobody wants to experience pain anymore. And pain is not necessarily a good thing. It's a sign that something is wrong. But we don't want to go through the pain. The old cliche, no pain, no gain. We get the gain so readily that we don't.
There's another thing. I mean, you're not using your brain. The
Right.
brain is a muscle. If it's not exercised, it's going to wither away.
There's no imagination.
I like that.
If you don't use it, you lose it.
So one of the things I saw was that these are forecasts or predictions that 1/4 of white-collar jobs will disappear because the artificial intelligence will do those jobs very quickly. Just like the student's paper was written in 1 minute or a few seconds, and she submitted it without even knowing what the assignment was. If the AI can produce the results, then what's the point? Yeah. Of course, I look at careers like mine that will disappear as well because people will say, gee, why do I need to go through all of that effort when I can just submit documents to some institution and get a diploma with no effort? Yeah.
I remember reading an article a while back, and it said that only 2% of the workforce is self-motivated. Then there's like 50-some% that'll do it if they have a boss telling them what to do. And then there's the balance of it that they're just going through the motions. I mean, they don't do anything unless they absolutely have to.
I was going to ask you to find that and send it to me, but I can look at that myself, right? In a few seconds. I can find it. But just by listening to what you said. So what are the consequences of an inactive work habit? Question number 2. What might be the consequences of an inactive work habit?
Lazy, make mistakes,
Okay.
no learning.
This is telling us that if you don't work, number one, you don't eat.
There you go.
You don't move forward in anything. I mean, you get up in the morning.
Yep.
What do you have to look forward to? Do you know what I mean?
So no
we
job.
We all need goals in life.
There'll be no job for you. You will end up looking at other people having and not having. And one consequences of somebody else having what you don't have. Envy is the start of that. And it could lead to other events like, okay, why should you have more than I? And people start to create a covetousness that could lead to illegal actions.
But there's also no reason to get up in the morning.
You'll be fat and lazy.
Well, it also leads you down the wrong path, right?
The idea that you will end up doing harm to others and yourself because of your laziness, because you just have this sense that things should come to you and you have an entitlement, and that could be a problem. On the spiritual, yes.
I was going to say, if we're not working, we still have to eat and we still need, then there's an expectation someone else is going to provide those. But we have to look at it in a spiritual sense too.
Thank you.
Because if we can't take care of ourselves, we can't get up and work, which is just kind of, God put it in us, we're not going to do the same feeding our spirits. And we're going to neglect that, or we're going to expect that to come instantly. Like I can read one verse and now I'm safe. John 3:16. I don't have to go any further.
Or I can say the sinner's prayer and I'm in. And there's no need to grow and then nothing else. I get the reward. I don't need stars in my crown. I just need to get in. Yes.
Then we also, if we don't work and we don't produce, we can't help others.
Exactly. That's
right, yes.
Yeah.
And those that don't produce, they don't get the joy out of life. I mean,
There's
I
satisfaction.
it's more fun. Life is more fun. It's more entertaining. I don't have to look outside of in the world anymore. I mean, I do, but I don't have to. I can say, oh, okay, that's just stay with God. And these that don't, they're still not getting that satisfaction. They may be reaping the reward in the end, which is it's good. But while they're doing it, they're not having that fun.
Well, I want to honor Mark Burr, who would say there's a difference between joy and happiness.
Yeah.
Happiness depends on happenings.
Right.
So you learn to find joy even when there's no happiness.
Right.
I say it's like a river. The top of the water is where the wind is blowing, the bottom is calm. So that's the joy, the deeper thing that flows.
I get a lot of joy being a nurse, bringing comfort and assistance to somebody in need. If you're a teacher, you have joy when you see the light turn on in your students. So I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah?
For me, I think just my personal, being a carpenter, to go ahead and build something that looked amazing, or you say, I can't believe I did that. You know, it was, of course, with the Lord's help. I mean, none of us do anything on our own. But to sit back and look at something and admire it, you know, through God's help, it's just, to me, is an amazing feeling.
Yes.
I want to go to question number 3. The question asks, how does this passage compare or contrast with the teaching on Sabbath rest in the Bible? As you think this through, what is Proverbs 6 saying, and how does it compare or contrast with the idea of Sabbath rest? God commanded that we take a rest. The Sabbath is so that we can rest and reflect on God and be grateful to God for everything He's done. The cycle of life where we have to rest every day as well. Rest is important.
When you're an aunt, I'm an aunt because I'm a doer.
I'm an uncle.
And he's always telling me, take a break, rest. And when you're used to doing that, it's a struggle to sit at the feet of Jesus.
Wow.
And take the time. Because I'm thinking, oh, I should be doing, I hear the dryer, I need to send a card. So there's a struggle to keep this balance.
I'm so glad you said that because I always imagine you as having your priorities in order. The struggle is like, well, she's a real person.
Yes. I mean, the other day I just simply sat there and I said, and I don't work anymore, but I work because I'm an aunt. And I just said, oh, Lord, you've got to quiet me, bring me, help
Give
me
me rest.
focus. And sometimes it's just one word or a small verse. Sometimes it's, all of a sudden it's an hour. But it's a struggle when you're a type A aunt to quiet yourself. So the Sabbath is good, but I can carry the workaholic in me to the Sabbath if I'm not careful.
I love that because I think many of us have that where you draw the line and say it's time to rest or it's time to take a break.
He helps.
Yeah. My wife says union workers need a break and she just stops and takes a break. So I need to become a union worker as well. We're okay, take a break. But there's some of us who feel as though we have to keep going. And I was at home by myself this weekend, and I didn't do anything. I didn't even leave the house at all. It's the first time I'm leaving the house. Well, I needed that break.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts about Sabbath rest or resting versus what this passage is saying?
Jesus was busy and he rested.
Yes,
He
yes.
even rested on Saturday.
Well, I think the rest helps you when you have nothing going on to get your thoughts in order,
Excellent, excellent.
to realize
Excellent.
because when you're in a rush, oh boy, this seems like the right answer. But when you get a chance to stop and realize, wait a minute, I can veer a little bit and get better results, and you get that only through to stop and realize what you need to do or accomplish.
Rest is commanded, yes.
Yeah, I just had a thought, when my husband used to work on cars, and, and something wasn't going right, and he'd work and work and work and work, and he'd yell and scream and holler, and then he'd just say, it can't be done, it just can't be done, and he'd stop and go in the house, and he'd rest for about 15 minutes. And he'd go back out and fix the car. But he needed that rest in order to let his brain and his body rest.
When I was a student in high school, I found that if I had like Spanish vocabulary to do, and I did it before I went to bed, in the morning I would actually my brain would have done something with it, and I can have a greater chance of remembering it than if I did it at the very last minute. So sometimes organizing yourself and then taking the rest, it's kind of like when you eat food. You have to let it digest. So you hear a word and you have to give it time to digest in your soul and give you a benefit. Any other thoughts about that? Okay. Question number 4. A little assignment for you. Look at verses 10 and 11, and we're going to rephrase those in your own words. What are we telling the sluggard here?
When you master your time and have time to rest, then you'll come back. After you had that rest, you'll come back full charged, ready to go, and not burned out.
There's also the idea that you might say, I'm going to take a little break. And a little break might become a longer break, and a longer break. And you can't get back into your work mode. So you have to have that discipline. Diligence in doing what you're called to do. Remembering what you're called to do. And having the personality A or B. I got to do this thing. I'm going to get it done. And not procrastinate too much. I wouldn't ask if there are any procrastinators in here because it's sometimes okay to be a procrastinator, especially if somebody else does it. Well, that was not nice. Sometimes if you don't do the job, somebody else will come along and do it. Remember that cliche? Give the job to the busiest person. They'll get it done. So anyway, I'm not going to pursue that any further.
Leslie does that.
I don't know how she does it. Let's look at the second passage. We're short on time. We're going to read it, even if we don't study it. Proverbs 11, 24 through 28.
Okay, generosity. One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. People curse the one who hoards grain, but they pray God's blessing on the one who is willing to sell. Whoever seeks good finds favor, but evil comes to one who searches for it. Those who trust in their riches will fall, but the righteous will thrive like a green leaf.
This one is more challenging for me. I want someone who has a clearer understanding of this passage to make a comment here. How might this passage be applied in the modern workplace? How might you apply this? Proverbs 11. I struggle with this passage.
Generosity?
Yeah.
Apply to generosity.
One person gives freely, without another withholds unduly, comes to poverty. How do you interpret verse 24? Do you have any
God
comment?
loves a cheerful giver. From personal experience, going through divorce and being the single person in the home, I literally had to learn to write my tithe check first. My income should not have paid the bills and put 2 of my children in Christian school. But I was never late, except when one kid forgot to take the check out of the locker. I was never late with a bill. It's a miracle for almost 18 years. A miracle. Now, it's different when you have enough. You have to remember to be generous.
Thank you.
You want to just keep building, because if this much is good, maybe this much is better. If this much is good, maybe that much is, where you have to keep the outflow equal to the income.
Yeah. So when it says in verse 25, a generous person will prosper, and whoever refreshes others will be refreshed, we have to view that certainly in a spiritual sense. Because you could be generous to a fault and end up giving away things that you need. And that's not a good place to be. You have to know when to say no. Especially if you're giving to people who you know they will not make good use of the resources you have. So you have to ask, do I give them resources or do I pay for something that will help them to help themselves? So that's my struggle with that passage. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on that passage because it's a challenge to me. If somebody wants to continue on that, we have 5 minutes left. I'd like to move to the third passage, Proverbs 22, 1 through 4.
Integrity. A good name is more desirable than riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. Rich and poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Humility is the fear of the Lord. Its wages are riches and honor and life.
Wow. So I'll start with the first line there, question number 9. A good name is more desirable than riches. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree.
What do you think is meant by this? A good name is more desirable than riches.
When people are talking about you, we want them to say good things and not bad things.
Yeah.
Gee, I can feel it.
What was the saying? The old saying, something, your name is all you have, or something they used to say back.
Yes.
What it meant was your integrity is all you've got. I mean, if you can't,
You never change your name.
yeah.
You
I
know,
don't
your
think-
family
There used to be a
name, you know.
saying, and I can't think of it, but.
Well, here's a saying that I remember. Integrity is who you are when nobody's watching. When nobody's watching. Character, yeah. Character, yeah. Who you are when nobody's watching. So you want to make sure that you're a person of integrity and you don't take shortcuts when nobody's looking at it and pretend, oh, I'm going the long way when everybody else is. Yeah? You're not just doing it for people's eyes on you. It's who you are through and through. Good
But I
character.
think it also allows people to trust you. Because you are who, you walk the walk, you talk the talk. You know, you do it all. And so people will respect that.
We used to say working, the difference between a craftsman and a hack. The craftsman will fix his mistakes before he walks away.
Wow.
The hack will just walk away.
Wow, love that. Yeah.
You know, that's just the way it was. And then I used to say, well, doing something that's not up to par is like writing your name on a check that's going to bounce.
Ouch.
You know what I mean?
Ouch.
High standards.
We went the other day, a job we worked on, there was 52 buildings in there. We were there a year, the most I've ever been any place. And turn around, we drove by there the other day. It's on Rochester Road in Hamlin, right behind that mall. And to see these buildings, and I was telling her, I did this, I did that, and to see that stuff still standing 30 years later and still looking as good. It's like I say, it's, you know, gives you more because you got that self-accomplishment.
All the arches.
Yes.
But I also think it's example, right?
Yeah.
See, they learn that's a good thing because look what you're doing here.
Used to, all you'd have to do is handshake for something, you know. And if you didn't, then you lost that esteem.
Yes.
Well, it used to be, as far as before you became a journeyman, you had a master, and you would follow him, and now it's not like 4 years. You know, it used to be 10 years, 12 years to become a journeyman. Now you go to the carpenters, it's 4 years. When they're trying to get more members, you spend $200 and all of a sudden you get the membership. You're a journeyman. Well, that doesn't make you a journeyman. You know what I mean? You may be getting the pay, but I would feel like I'm stealing to get that money and not be what I'm supposed to be.
In closing, the reflection question is, how can I guard my heart against the love of material possessions? Again, reading the song, in works or office, field or mart, where our appointments, Lord, may be, grant that with mind and hand and heart, we labor as we would for thee. There's another song that says, we'll work until the master calls, fighting on, da, 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 da. Anyway, you want to make sure that you're doing what you're being called to do, ever onward, making sure that you are consistent and holding on to the principles, not taking shortcuts. There's so much that we could talk about this passage, but unfortunately the time is short, and I think I have to wrap it up here. Make sure that we guard ourselves against desiring stuff, and make sure that we seek to desire things that will last, relationships, and certainly our eternal reward. Valuing those things more than stuff. And it's hard because we live in a materialistic society. And sometimes we see something we just have to have, as Mary was saying last week. I just have to have this, until somebody says, no, you don't need to have it. We need to be reminded to keep our focus on the main thing. All right, we're going to wrap it up here. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for the time we spent together today, and we pray that this lesson will work on our hearts, and we will continue to think it through, and that we will be able to share it with others. And may we rejoice today because of all you give to us in Jesus' name. Amen.